From West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come to the floor today to express my strong support for the confirmation of Judge Neil Gorsuch to be the next Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Few individuals over the last century have impacted the American legal discourse as profoundly as the late Justice Antonin Scalia. In the wake of his untimely passing last February, Justice Scalia left behind a legacy of faithfully applying the law and upholding the principles of our Constitution. Judge Neil Gorsuch is a worthy successor to Judge Antonin Scalia. Judge Gorsuch understands the protections granted in the Constitution, including the separation of powers, federalism, and the Bill of Rights. He knows that the Constitution provides Americans with an indispensable safeguard against government overreach. His past opinions demonstrate that he will honor constitutional protections afforded through due process, the right to bear arms, equal protection under the law, and religious freedom. Legal experts from across the political spectrum are very much in agreement with the Gorsuch nomination. The American Bar Association's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary unanimously gave Judge Gorsuch the highest possible rating of well qualified for the Supreme Court. I couldn't agree more. One of Judge Gorsuch's associates, the Chief Judge of the 10th Circuit, who served with Judge Gorsuch, has said about him, and I quote, "Judge Gorsuch brings to the bench a powerful intellect combined with a probing and analytical approach to every issue. He brings to each case a strong commitment to limit his analysis to that case, its facts, and the record, and the law cited and applicable. He does not use his judicial robe as a vehicle for anything other than deciding the case before him," end quote. President Obama's former Solicitor General, Neil Katyal, penned an op-ed in the New York Times supporting Judge Gorsuch, and he wrote, and I quote, "I have no doubt that if confirmed, Judge Gorsuch would help restore confidence in the rule of law. His 6 years on the bench reveal a commitment to judicial independence, a record that should give the American people confidence that he will not compromise principle to favor the president who appointed him," end quote. Those are the words of the Solicitor General who argued President Obama's arguments in front of the Supreme Court. And Judge Gorsuch has been through the confirmation process before, as we've heard many times on this floor. When senators, some of them in this body today, approved his nomination to the Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit without opposition. It's clear to me through our conversation, as I was privileged to meet Judge Gorsuch several weeks ago, and a thorough examination of his record, and watching last week's hearing in the Judiciary Committee, that Judge Gorsuch will decide cases fairly based on our Constitution and laws. And isn't that the way it should be? This is what West Virginians would expect from a Supreme Court justice. Newspapers in my state have recognized that this nominee's strong qualifications of independence and respect for the rule of law. The Charleston Daily Mail editorialized that, and I quote, "Gorsuch has a strong legal credentials that deserve to be confirmed. He is the kind of pick that any president should make, Democrat or Republican, because of his proven qualities necessary for a justice, a strong understanding and respect for the nation's founding document, the U.S. Constitution," end quote. The Wheeling Intelligencer and News Register wrote, and I quote, "During hearings last week, Gorsuch's suitability for a high court post was made abundantly clear. He is precisely the type of judge faithful to the Constitution, not ideology on specific issues, that this nation needs," end quote. And the Martinsburg Journal said, and I quote, "Gorsuch seems to believe in using the plain language of the Constitution to decide cases, regardless of his own preferences. That someone who believes only the people, not the courts, can change the Constitution is exactly the type of Supreme Court justice we Americans need," end quote. The American people benefited from an open and transparent Supreme Court process that led to Judge Gorsuch being nominated. During the 2016 presidential election, both candidates were transparent about the type of Supreme Court justice that they would appoint. President Trump released a list of 21 names, a list that included Judge Gorsuch, and promised voters that he would fill the Supreme Court vacancy with someone from that list. Well, the voters were paying attention. According to the NBC News exit poll, 70% of voters said the selection of a Supreme Court justice was either the most important factor in their vote for president or an important factor. Let me state that again, 70%. The American people weighed in, and President Trump acted wisely in selecting Judge Gorsuch. He is a mainstream judge who is well qualified for the United States Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the Democrat leader has indicated that his party intends to engage in an unprecedented partisan filibuster of this nomination. A filibuster of a nomination of this caliber would be a tremendous mistake, I believe, that would harm the Senate as an institution. There has never been a Supreme Court nomination defeated by a partisan filibuster of the type that the Senate Democrats are telegraphing. It is one thing to vote against a nominee on whatever grounds a senator may wish, but it is quite another to filibuster in an effort to block a nomination submitted by a duly elected president that has the support of the majority of the Senate. Senators have always enjoyed the ability to filibuster nominations. That ability has remained available because senators have shown restraint in applying that power that comes along with requiring unlimited debate. The clear tradition of the Senate, and this is a body of tradition I have learned, over the course of the 230 years of history, is a confirmation by a majority vote. That tradition has been demonstrated in recent Supreme Court confirmations. President Obama nominated both Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan to the Supreme Court. Neither Justice Sotomayor nor Justice Kagan faced a filibuster in the Senate. President George W. Bush nominated John Roberts as Chief Justice. There was no filibuster attempt against that nomination. President Bill Clinton nominated Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer to the Supreme Court. Neither faced a filibuster. And President George H.W. Bush nominated David Souter and Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. Neither justice faced a filibuster, even though 48 senators voted against the Thomas nomination. One recent Supreme Court nomination did require a cloture vote when a group of Democrat senators attempted to block a vote on the confirmation of Justice Alito's nomination. But a large majority of senators, 72 in fact, invoked cloture, preserving that bipartisan practice of rejecting filibusters against Supreme Court nominees. Among those who rejected the Alito filibuster in 2006 were the two Democrat senators from my state, Senator Robert C. Byrd and Senator Jay Rockefeller. 72 senators voted to invoke cloture on Justice Alito's nomination, but only 58 ended up voting for the final confirmation. The Senate has a very clear history of rejecting the use of the filibuster on Supreme Court nominations. There's no justification for a filibuster on the Gorsuch nomination. Neil Gorsuch is a mainstream judge with the highest possible rating from the American Bar Association. He was confirmed by the Senate without objection in the year 2006. His service on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals has earned the respect of his judicial colleagues, and he has demonstrated the independence and respect for the law that the American people expect from a Supreme Court justice. I hope that at least 8 of my Democrat colleagues will join us, regardless of how they ultimately vote on Judge Gorsuch's nomination, or its confirmation, excuse me. I hope they will recognize the need to invoke cloture on this nomination. The Senate will confirm Judge Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. For the good of the nation and for the good of the Senate, there should be no filibuster of this well-qualified nominee. And I yield back.